Hi, and welcome to If These Heels Could Talk. I'm JoyGenea with Solutions by JoyGenea.
And I'm Michelle with Bad Cat Digital, and today we are talking about building consensus. Um, yeah, this is an odd. It feels like an odd topic, but it's coming out of something from what's
Well, it's
happening
news.
right now.
I was just say it's very news relevant right now. So even when you
Yes,
listen to this, you'll recall a point where this was taking place.
yes. So you'll probably hear this later, and this will all be resolved by the time you hear it, likely. Maybe not, in
Oh
which case
God,
we'll
I
be in
hope
a really
so.
interesting place. But yesterday, in real time, um, the United States Congress met for the first time for the new session, and the House of Representatives went to elect a Speaker of the House, and no Speaker was elected, which is the first time that's happened in 100 years. Literally 100 years. I think it was 23 or
Yeah, that's
1923.
yep.
Yeah, so literally 100 years. So,
Hmm.
um, the basically this got us thinking about what is this process and what stops because you don't have a Speaker of the House, and a lot stops. So, new members of Congress are not sworn in because they're sworn in by the Speaker. Typically, on the first day of Congress, the Speaker of House is elected and new members of Congress are sworn in. In fact, so typically that all of the stuff to swear in all of the new members was literally in chambers yesterday, and it was not used. So, so this is so like just how it works is that the Speaker of the House is a pretty rote vote, and the reason it is because it's almost always a representative who is elected into the party that now holds the majority. That's not how it has to be, but that's how it has been for the last,
Hmm.
in living memory. Literally my living memory, and I think yours too,
Mine.
Georgina.
Yeah, yep. That's how it's
And
always gone.
and then typically between the election, which happens in November, and the swearing in or the first day of Congress, which is in early January, there's basically 2 months. It's like early November to early January. There's basically 2 months for people to throw their hat in the ring for speaker, whip the votes, and walk into this day having done all of that and having built a
Mm.
consensus so that they can get the simple majority. So there's 435 members of Congress. The House Speaker needs 218 votes because the congressional count is so close. It's very,
Mm.
very close. Right now, out of the 435, there are 212 Democrats, and that's 200 or 222.
I think
That
that's
does
what
that
I
add
saw.
up?
Yeah.
223 Republicans. So the Speaker of the House needs a simple majority, which is 218. So basically, all but five of the same party have to vote for the same person in order to achieve this. Or
Mm.
somebody has to build consensus across the aisle in order to achieve the Speaker role. It's closer than it's been in a long time. And the front runner, Representative McCarthy, in three separate votes yesterday, did not get the simple majority. The highest vote count I think he got was 202, something like that. So 16 votes shy. So here's the question.
Yes.
This is not a political
Nope.
podcast. We're not commenting on
So just everybody
one
relax.
thing or
This
the
is
other.
not going
That's
to get
not
into.
what we're
Yeah.
talking about. We're
Nope.
not going to talk about is this is unprecedented. It's not unprecedented. It's happened before. In fact, the most votes it took for a Speaker of the House in the late 1800s was 133 votes. So we
Mm.
could be in for a long ride. Time will tell. We'll listen to this in a few weeks when this is all resolved, and see kind of maybe it'll be resolved tomorrow. Who knows?
Who
Or
knows?
today. The point is though that um, how do you build consensus, especially when it's so close, especially when you don't choose the people that you're working with. Electors in a variety of districts around the country choose the people that you work with when you're a representative like that. Your coworkers are not chosen by you. You pick the job, but you don't pick the coworkers. In fact, you don't even know who the coworkers are going to be when you run for the job. So how do you build consensus in an environment that is set up for not building consensus? And that's kind of what we want to talk about today, because a lot of different cultures, a lot of different companies are not set up for building consensus, and some are set up in kind of authoritarian spaces. Some Sometimes people bring their own baggage to the conversation. So
Well,
yeah,
people
building
always bring their
consistency.
own baggage,
Yeah,
some.
don't always. Well, my coach says and has taught me that we all bring our whole selves to work every day, which means that
Yes,
we bring our bad moods, we bring our baggage, we bring our past, we bring our
our
emotional
biases
triggers, our
are
biases,
yeah,
um, in addition to our joy and our excitement and our
yes.
passions and our values and the things that we find important and good. So yeah, how do we build consensus in an environment that's not set up for consensus?
I think something that we kind of pre-hit and record, actually pre-crash. Anyways, we discussed that was really good was about the fact that it's not consensus is not everybody agrees.
Right. Yeah.
And I think for some people that like in my world in the PQ my positive intelligence world we talk about those as pleasers. That can be really really hard for some people to understand that everybody in the room is not going to agree. We're going to come to a consensus like in the situation we we're talking about.
We're going to come to a place where we can move forward together, but that
Yes.
doesn't mean that everybody's going to be on board right away. And it
Yep.
doesn't mean that it does mean that people are going to have to get on board who don't want to be. And
Yes.
it does also mean that people are going to be frustrated with what they got or didn't get in that process of what they
And
wanted.
and this can be as simple as new I'm going to use software because I'm fighting with that right now. I'm needing and having to implement a new CRM because of the crash of my email if I hadn't talked about that.
Oh, yeah,
And
awful.
and that's an intricate part of my whole operation. Like it was a foundational core thing and all of a sudden it's missing and I ignored that for a little. I ignored it. I
Yeah.
couldn't come to a consensus on which software to move forward with, how to best move forward with it. And so now I've delayed this. Now it's become painful, very
Mhm.
painful.
Mhm.
And when I look at it, I have made a consensus. But I did work
Yeah.
with my team, the people that are going to
And
have to
now it's
use it.
every port in a storm because it's
Yes,
painful and you just want it done.
yes. And I also think about it in terms of in business, any software, you know what I mean? When any
Yeah.
businesses,
Yeah.
I've helped businesses implement new softwares and the amount of getting that consensus and getting that buy-in and getting those early adapters engaged
Yep.
and in
Because
that's the
you have people
difference
who
between success and
there
failure, just like him.
yeah, and there are people who are excited about change and there are people who dread change, and getting them on the same page with, that the I mean, people have so we have to understand that what we're overcoming here is an individual has work to do. And
Hmm.
anything that we do to change their workload can
But
change it can increase that mountain, it can decrease that mountain, but we don't know necessarily which one is going to happen.
well,
And
and
different
realistic
things are going to happen for different people.
Well, and realistically, I think at first it's going to increase everybody's mountain no matter what. That's
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's the unknown of how long that will be. I mean,
Right.
I know a
And
company
how
that was a
much it will decrease in the end. Like how
yes,
much will it actually save
right?
out of that mountain? Or are we just increasing the mountain temporarily to not really decrease it in the future?
And we as people have all experienced those types of changes, and so we have
Yes.
bias. That's the reality of
Yeah.
it. We have
Yeah.
bias towards change because we go, wait a minute, I remember doing this
Wait,
this one
wait, wait,
time,
ah.
mm, mm,
But
but we
sometimes change
can't.
is
We have
inevitable because you have to respond to changing technologies, or you have to respond to I mean, I think about what's happening with Southwest, which we avoided talking about on this podcast.
to.
But they're operating with core facility software and operational software that's 30 years old.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it's from the mid 90s. And so part of the challenge that they're having is that their staff still have to physically call in every day to tell people where they're at and get their assignments. That's a that's a daily, like, I haven't had to do that at work since I worked for a bookstore in the 90s. Like
Wow.
that's like old style, right? Like, and
Yeah,
other systems track employees' locations. Now, let's be 100% clear. Southwest as an airline has to know where their crews are physically,
right,
where their pilots are, and where their flight attendants are. They have to know what city they're in. That's what I'm
right.
talking about employers tracking employee locations, not like some
Right.
creepy way of tracking somebody around town when they're not at work. Like that's not what I'm talking about. They have to know where people physically are so that if they need to reroute them, they can. And
Right.
part of this domino thing that they're in is that they can't do that. And they chose for 30 years not to deal with it,
Yep.
literally.
And then
Well, maybe let's be fair, 20, because 30 years ago they had, I'm sure, the top of
yeah,
the best stuff.
absolutely.
But they chose not to deal with it. They chose not to operationally deal with it for 20 years and never upgrade it, and here they are. So I think about, but when I think about consensus, the thing that I think about is like, there's this saying that in a negotiation, you know, it's a successful negotiation if everybody walks away a little bit mad. And
Yes. And I
because
felt that. Have you felt
I
that?
felt that like in a like in bartering or in usually in like bargaining like for
Yeah.
something like I'm at a
Yeah.
flea market or something and I'm bargaining. I pay a little bit more than I wanted to,
Yep.
and they take a little bit less than they wanted to, and that's how you move forward together. Is
Yes.
everybody gives something that they don't want to give.
Yeah.
And the other way to put that is that everybody gets something that they want because you have a shared goal. Otherwise, you wouldn't be negotiating in the first place. If they didn't have something that was, if that person at that flea market didn't have a cool dresser that I wanted in my house,
Right.
that person doesn't want to take the dresser with them. They
Right.
want the money instead of the dresser. That's why they're there. They're there to sell it.
Yes.
And I want the dresser, not the money, because that's why I came to the flea market. So our presence in the situation indicates that we have a shared goal.
Yes.
Um, and so the bargaining then is just about giving up, giving up a little bit so that we can each feel at least somewhat good about the transaction. But then that means that we're not going to all feel great.
And that leads us into that world that we can kind of exist in at times where we feel entitled to walk away with feeling like
Right.
we've like we're the winner, we did
Right.
amazing, we got,
Well, and you know, and again, this is not a personal comment or a political comment. The reports of the situation with Representative McCarthy would kind of indicate a sense of being owed. He said he had earned. There was a statement that he made that he had earned this, um, probably through his time at the House, or like there's
well,
just there's
when
this
haven't there been times that we've fought, this is what I think of, when haven't there been times when I followed all of the rules
right,
and some dude or dudette flies
right,
in, doesn't follow any of the rules, and all of a sudden gets hired past me at a job, or
right,
you know what I mean, or gets
right.
picked for the team, or whatever it is,
And
gets the
there's
contract. I've had
well,
that
and
happen.
there's that I was listening to this I don't even remember who it was, so I'm gonna have to look it up and so we can put it in the description because I don't want to rip off
Oh
this
yeah.
guy's concept. But he said I listen to people. This is an older man, an older white man talking, and he said I listen to people say things like that black woman stole my job or took that from me. And he said, and I listen to them, and then I say, I just have one question. What made you think it was yours?
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, when I listen to Representative McCarthy's statements that he's making, not the pundits talking and all of
Yep,
that
yep.
jazz, it sounds like he thought this was already his.
Yeah.
And people just are holding him back from taking what's rightfully his. And
Mm-hmm.
that is not how you build consensus. That's really not. That kind of entitlement of like, well, I'm just going to walk in and take what's mine is not a consensus building place. And the other place where you don't build consensus, and I think this is what's particularly pertinent, is we have kind of a political environment right now that's really heavily rhetoric. It's rhetoric forward, and people talk themselves into all or nothing positions with the public statements that they make. And so people talk about their like unwillingness to compromise. They're going to stand fast. They're stubborn. They're, like these
Mm-hmm.
things that are not consensus building skills are actually really rewarded right now in a lot of places, and that is what
And that
people want,
carries, is that a
and it carries through.
representation of society, or does that carry over to society, or is it both? I think it's both. I
I
think they
think it's a
influence each other.
representation because otherwise it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
We as a group vote for people, and we're voting for people that are using all or nothing language, and are using this really strong positioned language. But the thing is that consensus exists in the margins. Consensus exists when you get off an all or nothing ledge and you actually talk and listen. And so when I think about, like, I was in a committee meeting yesterday morning before all of this happened, because they talked about they okay, so I'm just gonna take a little breather for a second and say
I would take a
that
segue.
they adjourned. The vote to adjourn was to reconvene at noon. Like, how late do these people need to sleep in? That's not my point. I'm sure that they're doing, like, private meetings and stuff in the morning, and it's not
Sure.
just laziness that keeps them from going to work until noon. But if I had to wear a suit every day, I'd probably want to go to work till noon too. The point is this. This is the actual point, though. I was in this committee meeting, and I didn't agree. The group wanted to go in a direction, and I knew, and it was like everybody was agreeing, and I didn't agree. It's not that I didn't agree with where they wanted to go, but I didn't agree with the timing. I thought it was too early. I didn't, and I voiced my concern, and I voiced my concern. It wasn't really ever addressed. The group didn't really see a need to address it. I was one voice out of 12.
Mhm.
And so when it came time to vote in Minnesota, when you're in a
Mhm.
committee like that, you have your discussion, you voice any concern, and then you vote for it anyway.
Mhm.
Because that's what we do politely. And
Yes.
I didn't. I didn't vote for it anyway. I have been, like, racked with indecision about, like, being a relatively low power person in this room, very much so.
Sure.
Um, and I said no. I said I
Yeah.
don't agree. My objection was not addressed. Now, the vote passed, which
Yeah.
means that I'm part of this group. Therefore, I'm on board with this vote now because the vote passed. Period.
Yes.
Even
Period.
if I don't agree with it, even if I think it's this, even if behind the scenes I might still have concerns, publicly, this is what it is because the
Mhm.
group passed that vote. But that doesn't mean that I can still be on the record in the minutes
Mhm.
as saying my concern wasn't addressed and voting no. That's my right. It doesn't stop it from happening. Um, it it it's not a power move. It's
Mm-mm.
nothing like that. It's just me saying I just think it's too early.
Well, and I think I've been sitting in those meetings where I've objected, or somebody, or somebody else has
Yeah,
concerns, and
right.
it's they're valid, and it's good to hear them. And then, yes, just like you said, we have to, yeah, we have to move forward. And maybe there's an action that's not taken at that time if it's not necessary, or there is action that has to be taken, and
Yeah.
so you vote on it.
And oh, go
I
ahead.
remember
Sorry.
watching a person come to a board meeting, and without building consensus, without communicating, without talking and listening in advance to his idea. And he threw out this idea with the assumption that we'd all just go, okay, yeah, sure, spend an X amount of dollars on this thing. Because in his mind, it was perfect. It was ideal. Why wouldn't everybody want to do this? This is the most amazing thing. And we weren't on board. And he walked away really hurt and angry. He really, really was. Because he's like,
Well,
why didn't you see it this way? And I was like, you didn't talk and listen, like you didn't get any of us on board. I don't know the why. Like there were so many, it was Swiss
nobody
cheese,
was
man.
included in the thought process.
Mm-hmm.
And if nobody's included in the thought process, they can't understand the conclusion. Like, we make decisions with our sets of priorities and our sets of values, and our sets of priorities and values aren't shared necessarily. So I think that the first step of building consensus is actually listening, because you can't
Yes.
address an objection or an issue if you don't understand it. So you have to listen to it. Like, if the core thing moving forward is that the house needs a speaker, period, because it can't
Yeah.
move without one. Like, it cannot move without a speaker. Okay. So instead of starting with this person should be speaker, let's start with the house needs a speaker.
Mm-hmm.
Can we agree on that?
Yes.
If we can agree on that, now we need to talk about what do we need from that speaker. What do we need that person to do?
Mhm.
Now we can start talking about who has those essential skills. If we can't agree on what that person needs to do or what skills that person needs to have, we're never going to agree on the person.
Yeah.
And so we could fight about the person until the cows come home. But if we back up and find that commonality and then move forward from there, we have a foundation to build something on instead of just, I want him. No, I want him. No, I want her. No, I want her. No, I
Do
want him.
you
No, I want
know
her.
do you know a few, or have you ever been around a few of the really gifted consensus type of people, like those people that can bring people from multiple different perspectives, beliefs, like all of that, and actually get them, to agree to something major and move it forward?
Um, I had a boss like that once. A
Okay.
long, long, long time ago when I was selling furniture. I had a boss like that once who would say, "Okay, there's conflict. Step back, find common ground."
Yeah, that's
And
great.
that was really good. I also had a professor, a couple different professors in college, but it's rare. It's rare. I meet a lot of people in business and in the public world. I meet politicians
Oh yeah.
and business owners and faculty members and academics and people
Hmm.
from all these industries and all of these stripes of life. Um, it's rare to find somebody who says, "Whoa, whoa, 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 back up off the ledge. Where are we solid? Where are we together?"
I've
And
I'm with
and
you.
that's
They
hard.
are rare, and when you do meet them, you know it.
Yeah,
Like
because
I've
it's not
met three or
manipulative.
four.
You're not manipulating a
Mm-mm.
situation to ask that question.
No,
If you're actually asking the question, it's not manipulative. It is consensus building, and it is finding that space of like, okay, now where do we go?
I
Like,
I I knew a guy, and I took training from him, and he was instrumental in implementing nationally in every single state child abuse laws.
okay,
That took shrewd negotiation. I mean, he literally, like,
yeah,
every state they had a list, like that was his effort, because there was, I didn't realize this, but at one point there were no child abuse laws at all. Or and so and so it was free range pretty much.
yeah.
There were no legal standings behind it. And
Well,
so that
there's a
needed to
long
be
running
implemented.
there's a
And I
long running
can't,
kind of value of what happens in somebody else's family is what happens if that's theirs to deal with,
right. And they felt like it was covered, and it wasn't. And so this
Right.
needed to happen. And I mean, he didn't talk a ton about doing that. Every once in a while he would talk a little bit about it, but it was learning from him and taking those
Yeah.
courses on stuff. It was great though, because I could just tell, wow, he could hear people's perspectives. He would ask questions and he would hear them, and just like you said, I'd watch him find common ground amongst people. When we sat down, I'm like, there's no way, and he'd do it.
I I
It was
had
great.
a I had a professor in undergrad who was part of the committees that well, first was part of conceptualizing the Oklahoma City bombing memorial.
Ooh.
And then I was in college during 9/11, and the next year was asked to be part of the group that conceptualized the 9/11 memorial.
Yeah.
Um, Now talk about a group of people with agendas. I
Sure.
mean, because you have people who are representing deep held religious beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
Those are really public art for memorialization is not a small thing. It has to mean a lot. It has to be very meaningful to a lot of people across
Mm-hmm.
a broad spectrum of belief systems, um, and a broad spectrum within belief systems. It has to satisfy a public need that is so individualized and varied. And so everybody, I mean, you're talking about huge groups of people,
Oh yeah.
committees of 20, 30, 40 people, and everybody's got an agenda. and
Right.
negotiate, and they do, because they all feel the need for the same thing as well. So not only do they have agendas, but everybody's agenda is
Oh,
personal
and it's
and
emotional.
emotional. Yeah.
Yes, personal,
Um
emotional, and
yes.
base rooted in beliefs and
Yeah.
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 Oh, that
Yeah.
gets and he loved that. Like obviously, if he kept
Yeah.
getting
And
involved, he loved that.
and they obviously appreciated his input and his role because he was asked to do another. Like
That's
that's
huge.
that's really, I mean, but that's about consensus. Like it has to get done,
Hmm.
because if it never gets done, then you're never fulfilling the public need, right? So
Right.
it has to be achieved. It has to be achieved within confines of time and space and money and all kinds of things. It's just literally a monumental task.
It nice one. Good pun. Good choice of
I didn't
words.
mean to, but there we are. So
Ah,
when we think about consensus, I really think we're talking about listening to
mhm,
understand instead of listening and waiting for your chance to speak. We're talking about being okay with handling our own individual, finding our lines and handling our own disappointments, in and of ourselves, so that we don't necessarily stop a process because we didn't get our way.
mm,
We're not children.
mhm,
um and I really think it's about it starts with that listening piece, and then it's about finding that common ground and building from there.
mhm,
um I think that whoever throws their hat in the ring to be speaker of the house for this house has a particularly tall order. It's very divided. It's divided among the party. I mean, the Republican Party has some really deep ideological gaps in it.
yeah,
There's a lot of rhetoric flying around. There's a lot of
it is
people.
politics.
Yes and no. I mean, I honestly, I think that, and this kind of goes off into another vein. Maybe we should talk about this in another place. But
Yeah,
one of the ways that you successfully hire people is to set up an interview process to really get to know them and get to know whether or not they have the skill set to do the job you're trying to get them to do.
yeah.
We have
Oh, that's
created a
totally true.
system. We, the electors, the people who elect people, have created a system where the skill sets to get elected and the skill sets to actually govern are two completely different skill sets. And so
That's an interesting conversation.
it's
Like
like
you're right.
setting
That
up,
is an
yeah,
interesting
it's like
business
setting up an
conversation.
interview. It's like setting up an interview as an obstacle course. And
Yeah,
then so that you have to have somebody who's really like got a lot of physical prowess in order to get through the interview. But then the job is about sitting in one place and moving one finger over and over and over again. Well, that's not what
and
you
they're like,
tested. That's not what you tested in the interview. You didn't get to know that person's ability to do that in the interview. So,
mhm,
at what point in the election process do we test people's ability to build consensus, to lead a
right.
team, to actually govern,
Hmm.
um, to represent interests other than their own individual interests, to represent the interests of people who don't agree with them? There's there's so many skills that are needed. I could go on and on and on. I have the theory, doesn't matter. The point is though um that there are not a lot of people with that skill set because we don't ask for that skill set when we elect them. And so now they're thrown into the deep end trying to get something done, literally just trying to make a speaker,
So
and it's
I'm
not
gonna
happening.
before I let us go, I'm gonna relate it back around. Are are our politicians representing us as we like are they kind of
Yes.
demonstrating that maybe we as a society, as a group of people, like are we good at or understanding
No,
building
we're not.
consensus right now? That's what I mean.
No.
In business, I see that quite often, actually building
Yes.
consensus. Or I mean, have you been, I know I've been hired for contracts and I have complete buy-in and consensus from the person who hires me, who did the contract, and then they hand me off to somebody else and they have not gotten consensus from that person.
Right. There's no buy-in.
And
Or
they're like,
or you
why are
or
you
you
here? What do
have
you do?
like
Like,
or you
I
have
don't
a
want you here.
client contact, like you have a client contact, they're 100% in, and then if they leave, their boss is like, screw this, I'm not doing this.
Yeah.
Like, or somebody or whoever replaces them is like, no, this isn't the right way to go. Like, and all of that happens all of the time. And I honestly
Yes.
think that part of it, I have to sneeze.
Oh no. Gesundheit.
Ugh, just pull a face, just pull all kinds of faces. Anyway, I honestly think that part of it, especially now, is that we don't want to feel disappointed. We don't want to give
Ooh,
up anything that we want.
yeah.
We don't,
That
we
that's what I
want
mean.
we
So
want everything that we want, and the concept that we would have to give up even part of what we want in order to get the goal achieved, the shared goal achieved,
mhm.
is just so completely foreign. And yet we do this in our marriages and our
Mhm.
interpersonal relationships all the time.
I know. And so that's I think the bigger, greater question is just they're showing us a mirror, and it's an opportunity
Yes.
for us when some things
Yes.
show up in the news and so forth. You have to kind of question yourself. When we've hired these people, they're a mirror
Yes.
of us, and
Yes.
how am I arriving to meetings? How am I arriving as a leader in
Yes.
a space of consensus, or finding common ground and
Right.
growing from there and keeping an
Or am I
eye
arriving in an authoritarian way as a leader, saying, "Well, you're
right.
going to get on board or else"? Am, am
And
I
how much
am I
buy-in you got
truly
from that one?
asking? If I ask for input from people, do I actually
Mhm.
want it?
Yeah. Yes.
Because I'll tell you, if you actually want it and it comes back and it's not what you expect, it's hard.
Yeah. It
It's
it
hard.
is. That's the leadership thing. So then you have to ask
That's
yourself, what didn't I communicate? Where's
or
the
or
breakdown?
what is the actual goal?
Yeah.
What are we really trying to achieve? Because if like there's goals, like group goals, and then there's individual agendas, and they're not the same thing.
Oh, no. And often
No.
I've noticed people don't know their individual agendas per se.
And they don't know the difference between the group's goal
Yes.
and where the group is going versus
And
their
that'll
individual agenda.
and sometimes you have to help people as a coach, I have a tendency to get in there and identify their why and then talk
Yeah.
about it with them, and they'll be like, "Oh, I guess that is why I'm voting that way." And I'm like,
Oh, and
"Okay."
I guess maybe I need to think about that a little bit, or do I really want to die on this hill?
Right.
Like,
Yes. Do I
like
want
when
to
I
die in this?
separate from it and I'm not in that emotional space, do I
Mhm.
really, this is the one? Like,
Yeah,
this is the
no.
one that this is the one that
Yeah,
I'm gonna just throw my body on the fire and just go for it.
right.
Really?
You do
This is my choice?
yeah, you do
Yeah.
have to
So
think
like,
about it.
yeah, I think that we do this in our interpersonal relationships. I
Yes.
think we build consensus with our intimate partners. I think we have the skills to build consensus in our homes with our kids and with our families. I think we do it with roommates. I think every time we talk about what to watch on TV and who's going to hold the remote control, we're building consensus.
Yeah.
So we have these skills. It's not that we don't have the skills, it's that we're not taking them outside with us. And maybe it's because we're afraid of change, or maybe it's because we don't trust the people that we're not truly the way that we do our partner. Like, I'm
Yeah.
sure that there's like all kinds
There's
of
a
psychiatric reasons that
but
I'm unqualified to discuss. So,
and as leaders and at this podcast, I would just encourage today as we go about our day, are
yeah,
you building consensus? Are you communicating enough to have buy-in into the things that you're wanting to shift? Are you listening to people
yeah.
when they're bringing things to you and they want something to shift? Like, and all that takes some
And
time,
if
but
you
it's
want to practice, order a group lunch,
right. Perfect. You're right.
because the conversation about whether to order Chinese food or tacos is a consensus conversation.
Perfect. That I love that. Today's task is have order lunch. There's the
Order group
task.
lunch.
And don't
Just
tell them
figure it
from where.
out.
Nobody says that. It's just like, where should we order lunch today? What should we do?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I love it.
All
Thank you
right.
very much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again at another time or having you listen to us. Please remember to follow us, rate us, and hang out with us on our website.
The consensus is that this
Yes.
is valuable time, and so we hope you have enjoyed If These Heels Could Talk, and you are open to sharing it with others. Thank you so much.